I've got a lovely new watercolour set here, so I thought I would use it to show you some watercolour techniques. My new watercolour set is all shiny looking and lovely. It's Schmink or Schminky. I'm not sure how you pronounce it. Schmink Horadam, I think is the right name for it. Anyway, what I thought I would do today is just show you a few watercolour techniques. So I'm going to split the page into separate areas and I'll show you some watercolour techniques. So I've got my double water bowl here that a friend very kindly made for me. So one of these areas of water will be used to wash the colour out of my brush, and the other one will be kept clean and it'll be used to absolutely clean the brush. So the first technique I'm going to show you is wet on wet, and what we do is we wet the paper, just clean water, and we make sure it's thoroughly wet. But what we don't do is make it so wet it's just a big puddle. You want to see the paper glistening with the water, but you don't want to be able to see just a big puddle of water sitting on top of the paper. So that's the paper, nice and wet. And now I'm going to go in with some watercolour paint, nice and intense. And because the paper's wet, it's going to spread out. So the wetter the paper, the further the paint will spread. And the drier the paper, the less far the paint will spread. And if you don't wet the paper past where you think the paint's going to go, the paint will stop at that area. For example, if I take it here, the paint will stop. Wherever the water stops, the paint will stop. Okay, so this is wet on wet. Now to further show you wet on wet, I can go into the wet paint I've just put down on the wet paper, and let's just add a wee centre into that. Now the paint and the paper are still very wet, so that centre colour is also going to spread. So that the pink is wet on wet and the blue is wet on the pink paint. You could leave the centre bit of colour that you're adding in, you could leave that until all of this is dry, and then it wouldn't bleed in the way that it bled there. So it's your choice whether you're adding more colour onto the wet paint, or you wait till the wet paint you've put down dries and then you'd be doing wet onto dry. Okay, this next one is wet on dry. So you immediately see the difference. This one has sharp edges with no colour bleeding where you're not putting the brush. Okay, perfectly sharp edges. So I'll wait for that to dry and then we'll add a centre colour into that. Okay, I have spent ages waiting for this to dry, but it's finally dried, so this is wet on dry. Again, the paint goes where you put it, it doesn't bleed anywhere, it just stays where you put it. So the next one I'm going to show you is where you add in, actually that's a wee bit too intense because I'm trying to show you. So the next one is where you add in additional or more intense or another colour into the wet paint you've just put down. So let's add the colour in there. Okay, now I think that's called, I think the term that's used for that is charging. So perhaps I'll add in the darker colour to make it a wee bit clearer. So that's charging your paint with colour. And you're doing that while it's still wet, so it blends itself again. Right, the next one I'll show you. So I put a bit of colour in here. Then I'll wash all the colour off my brush. And I'm going in with wet water. And it's touching the colour you've put down. Let me show you that again. So I'll put the colour in here. Then I'm starting off away from the colour with clean water. And I'm heading towards the colour and I'm touching the colour. And that allows the colour to blend into the clean water. Okay, I'll just do a few more of these for you. I have to do it quite quickly so I catch these petals of colour before they dry. Okay, so I'm coming towards the colour. Again, wet, separate to the colour, then move towards the colour, and then you touch onto the colour. Last one. Move towards the colour, and you're just touching onto the colour, and it blends itself. So I'm going to need a wee bit of patience for this next one as well. This one I'm going to show you glazing, so let's make some fatter petals. And now I'm going to have to wait for that to dry. So for glazing, you always leave the first layer you've painted to dry before you paint the next layer on top of it. You want that underlayer to show through the next layer that you paint. So let's add our layer on here. And you can see it also darkens the area where you've got the first layer as well. So what I can also do is I'll take the other colour, I'll take a different colour, and you'll see how that allows the underlayer to show through. So go over here. So I'm using blue, and where we go over the first layer, it's a kind of purple colour there. So again, for us to finish this flower, we would have to wait for both these layers to dry before we can add on the rest of the petals. Okay, we're going to go in with another layer here. So we've waited for these layers to dry. I've got another layer of blue. So again, it gives us an even darker area here. Darker area of blue. And then once this one's dry, we'll do a last layer of glazing over here. So let's add in our last glazing layer. And again, you can see the colours showing through from behind. So this is glazing. You make sure that your layer that you're painting on top of is absolutely dry before you paint the next layer. So this last one I think I'll show you in this video. It's often considered a mistake, but it can be used to good effect. So just painting an area there. What we're going to do is we're going to drop in, whilst the paint is damp, we're going to drop in some additional water. And what that does is it pushes the pigment away. And it pushes the pigment to the edge of where the water stretches to. So it's called blooming, or these are sometimes called cauliflowers. But it gives quite a nice effect. It can be used to add texture to certain areas, a bit of interest to certain areas. If it's done by accident, if you've gone back into your wet paint, try to add paint to it, and you end up with one of these blooms or cauliflowers. Really, the only way to rectify it is if you're able to paint over the whole area. Again, like so. Now by doing that, we may end up with a sharp line round here. But that's one way to rectify it if it's a result that you don't want. But there's a result that you can have if you like that. So these are the 6 techniques that I wanted to show you today. I'm just looking for my pencil so I can write them out for you. So this first one was wet on wet. That was wetting the paper first, then painting into the wet paper so all the colour bleeds, and it will bleed as far as the wet water was painted on, and it will stop at the edge of the wet water. This one is wet, oh, I'm going to smudge my hand there. This one is wet on dry, and the paint only goes where you place it with your brush. So this third one was charging into. So this is where you're painting with wet paint and then you add your additional colour or more intense colour into the paint you've painted. So that's called charging or adding. This fourth one, this was where we laid the paint down first of all, then we added in some clean water, not touching the paint to begin with, and then just stretching the clean water so it touched the paint and that allowed the paint to bleed. So that would be, what would we call that? Oh, I'm not sure, let's call it touching. Not sure if there's a correct name for that. This one absolutely is glazing. And these are called blooms, watercolour blooms. So I hope you find this useful. These are all techniques you can use. You can use them all in the same painting. You can use them as different styles within the same painting, or just have fun, and the best thing to do is get going with playing around with them. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I will see you soon. Bye.